As I strolled through the trendy Gangnam district here, South Korea's economic vitality was on full display. Sleek high-rises housing global tech titans like Samsung and LG towered overhead. Fashionable youths sipped espressos at stylish cafes, scrolling through the latest K-pop videos on their state-of-the-art smartphones. Yet scratch beneath this ultra-modern facade, and a more vexing paradox emerges in the land of the morning calm. For all its technological prowess and manufacturing might, South Korea is grappling with dimming economic prospects and deeper existential anxieties about its very future. The latest quarterly GDP figures released last week encapsulate these contradictions. South Korea's economy shrank an unexpected 0.2% in the second quarter, defying expectations of growth and underscoring the fragility of its consumer-led expansion. It was a disappointing stumble after the economy had surged 1.3% in the first 3 months of the year, fueled by a global semiconductor boom that has turbocharged exports from chip giants like Samsung and SK Hynix. While trade data indicates this tech export renaissance continued through June and into July, the domestic economy is failing to keep pace. Consumer spending remains anemic, private investment is slipping, and the vital construction sector is careening toward a credit crunch as developers strain under mounting costs and stubbornly high interest rates. In short, the country that has branded itself a miracle on the Han River is now facing a new existential quandary, one in which its vaunted technological edge may be insufficient to sustain broader-based prosperity. How can a rapidly aging, labor-starved economy cultivate the domestic demand and productivity gains needed to propel long-term growth? The real worry here is the shrinking investment that bodes ill for longer-term growth potential, said Kwon Young-sun, chief economist at Worry Finance Research Institute in Seoul. Plans for investment may be delayed further if companies wait until after the U.S. election in November. That the fate of the South Korean juggernaut is now intertwined with the whims of American voters is itself a startling role reversal. For decades, this stalwart U.S. military ally has looked to Washington to uphold the liberal global trading system and provide a security blanket against threats from the belligerent regime in Pyongyang. Donald Trump's mercurial America First policies put all that into doubt, stoking fears in Seoul of a U.S. retrenchment that could jeopardize the incentives enabling Korean automakers like Hyundai and Kia to expand electric vehicle production for American consumers. Now, a mere 3 months before Americans go to the polls, South Korea finds its 2023 economic fortunes hinging on which septuagenarian emerges victorious: the protectionist populist Trump or the Democrat he defeated, 80-year-old Joe Biden, whose climate policies have facilitated Korean corporate expansion across the Pacific. Such geopolitical dramas, however gripping, tend to obscure more profound civilizational challenges confronting this successful modern nation. As a dogged work ethic, deference to authority, and focus on technical mastery over liberal arts propelled South Korea's breakneck development over the past half-century, those very virtues may now be vulnerabilities in an era that demands creativity, risk-taking, and regeneration. Korea's education system was once focused on nurturing workers for manufacturing who emphasized practical skills and diligence over creativity, said Park Sung-yeol, an anthropology professor at Seoul National University. That worked well when we were in catch-up mode with the West, but it's less suited for an age that requires out-of-the-box thinking and innovation. The demographic math is equally daunting. South Korea is aging faster than any other developed nation, including Japan, with fertility rates recently falling to a global low of just 0.72 children per woman over her lifetime. That's well below even Singapore's nadir family values, baby bust in the late 20th century, portending a precipitous labor force decline in coming decades. The nation is already among the world's most robotized, deploying over 900 industrial robots per 10,000 manufacturing workers compared to just 200 in America. But automation alone won't be enough to offset demographic decline. South Korea needs fresh ideas for rejuvenating its human capital before its population succumbs to the so-called demographic time bomb that has already felled the Japanese economy. On this front, South Korea seems trapped in a 20th century policy framework still rooted in export-led growth, top-down governance, and social conformity. The very hallmarks of Asian paternalism that facilitated the economic miracle now breed alienation among the nation's youth and resistance to change. Korean society is so conservative, hierarchical, and status-conscious, said Hwang Ji-won, a 27-year-old startup founder who left Seoul for Silicon Valley. There's stigma against risk-taking or challenging traditional business models. That's why you don't see more innovation coming out of Korea. From organized labor's fierce resistance to restructuring and deregulation, to the fervid educational rat race that crushes childhood creativity, to rigid corporate hierarchies that discourage entrepreneurial thinking, South Korea remains constrained by the very Confucian tradition and statist impulses that underpinned its rise. These innate cultural biases are being perpetuated by entrenched political elites representing opposing nationalist visions. A hawkish conservative movement emphasizing traditional Korean identity and security ties to America, versus a progressive camp seeking greater diplomatic engagement with North Korea and deeper economic integration with China. Park Won-gon, a professor of international relations at Handong Global University, frames this ideological rift in stark terms. The conservatives believe the liberal government has put our core values, including a market economy, democracy, and the alliance with the United States, in jeopardy. The conflict between the two camps is becoming increasingly fierce. Amid such polarization, moderates seem as endangered in South Korea as in the United States. A bulwark of centrism that could pursue necessary but disruptive economic reforms and social investments has failed to take root. Instead, the nation oscillates between bouts of stagnant immobilism and reckless policy zigzags. During my visit, I met with Lee Jae-myung, the opposition leader who was narrowly defeated in last year's presidential election. His diagnosis was scathing. We've lost the capability to create a new dream or vision for our future. Korean politics has become focused only on regaining past glory. Lee described the national malaise in elemental terms as a civilization crisis that requires entirely new thinking. He believes South Korea must transition to a so-called novel civilization that de-emphasizes exported manufactures in favor of ecological sustainability, quality-of-life industries like healthcare and tourism, and a stronger social safety net. Such lofty prescriptions may strike some as utopian blather. Yet the uncomfortable truth is that virtually all mature nations blessed with wealth and security eventually confront civilizational growing pains akin to adolescence, searching for new anchors of meaning beyond just perpetual economic striving and material acquisition. Perhaps no nation faces more acute philosophical whiplash than South Korea, which, in a few short generations, has rocketed from an impoverished agrarian backwater to the world's 10th largest economy and a technological superpower. Its furious embrace of modernity has spawned runaway consumerism, rampant real estate speculation, and the atomization of communal bonds. The traditional extended family structures of the Confucian past have been ravaged. Household debt levels are among the highest of any OECD country. Nearly 20% of millennials identify as having infinite life, unfettered by marriage, children, or a permanent job. A shockingly high share of seniors, over 40%, live in relative income poverty. The dislocations of hyperspeed development have left a spiritual void that materialism cannot fill, stoking a mental health crisis as rates of depression and suicide soar, particularly among young men struggling with academic stress and mandatory military service. Our society is extremely competitive, brutally pragmatic, and money-driven, reflected Chung Bong-jun, 69, a former diplomat who spent decades promoting Korean business interests abroad. Those values served us well when we were a developing country, but they've gone too far now. We've become a highly polarized, winner-take-all corporate environment with inadequate social mobility and an unsustainable fertility rate. Chung is among those raising existential questions about where South Korea goes from here, after achieving spectacular economic success but losing its way spiritually and socially. Korea has achieved globalization of its economy, but not its values, he lamented. We've imported foreign materialism and individualism without developing a new value system to replace traditional Asian collectivism. Such critiques of modern Korean society's ethical drift are not new. Over a century ago, the brilliant philosopher and independence activist Yoon Chi-ho presciently warned that imitating Western material civilization while abandoning spiritual foundations would yield thraldom more dreadful than any bondage the East has known. Today, those words ring prophetic as millions of young Koreans indulge in impulsive overspending, digital escapism, and a pervasive no-life subculture of nihilism, porn addiction, and hypersexuality. Even the nation's robust churches are hemorrhaging millennial members apathetic to organized religion. For older generations, life was a process of accumulating economic and social capital for the future, said Lee Jong-hun, a psychologist at Dongguk University who studies campus mental health. But young people today crave immediate gratification with no commitment or goals. They feel hopeless about marriage, parenthood, or even having a stable career. In an increasingly balkanized Korea where the young and old inhabit starkly divergent realities, traditional blueprints for upward mobility through education and hard work appear irrelevant to the Instagram generation. A startling 40% of male South Korean teens now harbor thoughts of dropping out of society entirely, rejecting the cutthroat rat race their elders prescribe as the only path to success. This millennial malaise has spawned an entirely new social phenomenon dubbed the Sampo generation. Those who have given up 3 cardinal Confucian values: dating, marriage, and reproduction. An estimated 1 in 4 Koreans in their late 30s are now Sampo bachelors and bachelorettes, victims of structural economic barriers and a profound crisis of modern masculinity. Nam Sukban, a 37-year-old illustrator in Seoul, epitomizes the dashed dreams of his peers. Having failed his grueling national college entrance exam and unable to afford tuition anyway, he was left to wallow in underemployment without family wealth or an elite academic pedigree to secure a coveted white-collar job. I missed the first big turning point toward success because my parents were farmers, not some rich family buying their kid private tutors and test prep. Nam told me over draft beers at a dingy daytime bar in Seoul's hip Itaewon district, a haven for urban outcasts. We were surrounded by listless millennial men nursing alcoholic beverages well before most had finished their office duties. Nam says these recreation clan salarymen fuel an entire alternative economy of motels, hostess bars, and comic book havens where like-minded societal dropouts take refuge from the mainstream. After my first major failure, I felt like my life was ruined from the beginning, Nam explained, offering a revealing window into the psyche of downwardly mobile Korean men grappling with damaged masculine pride. It's so hard for men of my generation to get on conventional life tracks like marriage, because there's intense competitive pressure to fulfill traditional breadwinner roles. Indeed, the gender pay gap in South Korea remains the highest across OECD nations, obliging most young men to delay marriage until their 30s once incomes rise. An obsession with housing asset accumulation has further depressed family formation as skyrocketing real estate prices put home ownership out of reach for most. These factors have contributed to the nation's plight as the world's most elderly society awaiting birth. Over 16% of the population is already aged 65 or above, well before the total fertility nadir arrives in the 2030s. Seoul's limited efforts to encourage more births through paltry child subsidies and tax incentives have thus far proven ineffective. With 1.2 million Korean youth entering the ranks of the elderly by 2050 and the working population projected to plummet, the fiscal math of sustaining the nation's generous elderly entitlements will become untenable. Payroll taxes financing old age pensions are already among the highest in the OECD at over 25% of wages. South Korea may soon be forced to choose between perpetual austerity and slashing retirement benefits, a surefire recipe for intergenerational conflagration in a rapidly graying society. Or it could fully open its doors to younger immigrant workers from poorer nations, appending its ethnic homogeneity as the ultimate price of demographic decline. Some economists contend artificial intelligence could mitigate the impact of depopulation by supercharging labor productivity gains. Bank of America analysts predict AI alone could conceivably drive 25% of South Korea's potential GDP growth over the next decade. But realizing the full potential of this technological revolution will require Korean corporations to reinvent themselves from top to bottom. Legacy chaebol conglomerates like Samsung and Hyundai, which thrive through assembly line regimentation, hierarchical command structures, and brand ubiquity, may prove too rigid and change-averse for the coming AI age. Younger upstarts like Naver, the Google of South Korea, already seem better positioned to embrace the algorithmic future through flatter management, faster iterative innovation, and hiring of global AI talent less anchored in traditional Korean corporate culture. Implementing AI and digitalization effectively will entail massive deregulation to address labor rigidities, break down corporate fiefdoms, and inject more dynamism into the economy, said Kim Jong-soo, a financial technology specialist and former Bank of Korea official. I'm skeptical the chaebol will have the agility or shareholder accountability to make those strategic pivots. Political dysfunction and polarity paralysis are hardly unique to South Korea. What's notable is the rising discontent with the entire spectrum of establishment conservatism and progressivism on this peninsula. Millions of younger voters are rejecting the left-right binary altogether in search of some radical new organizing vision for society. Much of this anti-system backlash is being channeled into support for Ahn Cheol-soo, a software mogul and centrist presidential candidate known for his incisive critiques of establishment paralysis. Our two major parties are stuck in a zero-sum game of mutual hostage-taking and political revenge, On told me during a sit-down interview at his party headquarters in central Seoul. Neither side ever articulates a unifying narrative that speaks to citizens' deeper need for spiritual fulfillment, community, and balance in their lives. As a billionaire and leader of the traditionally centrist People's Party, parts of On's platform call for fiscal rectitude and corporate deregulation to spur innovation. But he's equally adamant about reinvesting dividends from growth into a more robust social safety net, expanded public housing, and a universal basic income to cushion the economic dislocation of automation. More audaciously, On envisions a more pluralistic fusion of Korea's traditional Confucian spiritual ethos with Enlightenment values that uphold individual liberties. A renaissance of classical Asian philosophy, he argues, could provide moral guardrails for the technological revolution and offer an indigenous value system palatable to Korean youth alienated by Western individualism. We need a new civilizational paradigm beyond just capitalism or socialism, beyond just pursuing GDP, On said, sounding a bit like South Korea's version of a latter-day Robert F. Kennedy railing against mindless materialism. We must balance industrial and economic development with our citizens' quality of life, their mental and physical well-being. Such idealistic prescriptions struck me as a quintessentially Korean cocktail. A bold, techno-utopian policy futurism coated in nostalgic folkloric philosophical seasoning. Whether On's Confucian democracy recipe can gain political traction remains unclear, but it speaks to the civilizational indigestion roiling Korean society. If there is a through line to my travels across this nation, it is a pervasive sense of drift, material abundance coexisting with profound anxiety over identity and existential purpose. South Korea has engineered one of history's most impressive economic renaissances, transforming from an immiserated agrarian backwater into a world-striding power in a single generation. Yet the very hypercompetence enabling that success now engenders paralysis in a nation unsure how to cultivate the cultural vitality, social resilience, and spiritual buoyancy required to propel the next Korean Renaissance. Top-down regimented growth by government edict has hit its limits. A future of sustainable flourishing will require releasing the bottom-up dynamism of human potential.